All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Today we are going to be presenting Staying Out of Regulatory Trouble, What Beauty Brands Need to Know. And I am Heather Bustos, the managing partner of Bustos Law Group. I am joined here by our amazing of counsel, Carrie Tesopoulos, who also works with Bustos Law Group, has an amazing background in the cosmetic industry. You can look up his LinkedIn if you'd like to know more. But just a little bit before we start about Bustos Law Group, the firm, we are a full service FDA compliance firm, and we provide services, everything from label reviews to MOCRA registrations, GMP audits, standard operating procedure packages, all that good stuff. We serve clients all throughout the supply chain. So manufacturers, distributors, importers, brand owners, we do a little bit of everything. And hopefully you never do get in trouble. That's really the point of this webinar. But if you ever are, we definitely can help as well. So warning letters, 483s, import alerts, all that good stuff, recalls, we can definitely help with that as well. So enough about that. We're going to dive right in because there's a lot of content here. And I know everyone's excited to hear more. All right. So first, I wanted to kind of set the stage, right? Imagine this is a play. I'm going to introduce you to the actors. These are the agencies slash people in the play that are going to regulate businesses in the beauty industry. So first, we start out with FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. They regulate pretty much most of the products that consumers use that either go into the body, onto the body, food, cosmetics, supplements, devices, drugs, all that good stuff. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, they regulate all kinds of claims. They essentially are there to make business practices more ethical and more balanced and fair. So they're really big on fair practices. And FDA and FTC kind of work together. They have a memorandum of understanding where they work together on the claim side of things. NAD, this is really important. Carrie and I were just talking about this before the webinar, but NAD, if you're not familiar with them, I hope you never meet them, but just know who they are, right? NAD is actually a branch of the Better Business Bureau. It's the National Advertising Division, and they are not a regulatory agency. I would consider them a watchdog for the FTC. So what they do is essentially regulate the same way FTC does. We'll say regulate, right? Because they're a third party. They're not actually a government agency. But what they do is essentially look at claims out there in the market, and then they can put together a case. And essentially, if you do not comply with them, they will submit that case to FTC, which the FTC issues fines and penalties. So it's important to just understand who they are and to take it very seriously if they do reach out. This, even though they're not a government agency, they still do hold a lot of power. The next one, class action litigation. We're going to talk a little bit about this. And guys, I'm not able to dig into everything here. You could do 20 million different presentations just on the different class action litigation situations going on, within the beauty industry. We're going to touch on a couple of those, but this is something to be aware of. And then finally, state governments, because, and obviously, I'm sure everyone on here knows, with the current administration, they're trying to shrink government. So state governments are starting to step in, come up with more regulation to fill that gap. So things like ingredients claims, those can be regulated at the state level. So it's important to keep an eye on the federal level as well as the state level, to make sure that you're complying across the board, especially if you're selling product in different states. And we're going to move to the next slide, which is what's at stake for your business. This is where I try not to scare you, but at least tell you a little bit about what can happen if you do not comply, or if you're not, keeping track of those actors, right, and what they're capable of bringing to your business. So things like warning letters from the FDA, fines, fees, and penalties from FDA, FTC, recalls, which costly, and in addition, can harm your brand reputation. Litigation, we already talked about that. Class action, not just the actual litigation, right? Before you even get to court, they will likely send a demand letter, and that can even be settled outside of court, but that comes with high costs, right? Going through that process, having an attorney on staff to negotiate, and then whatever that settlement amount ends up being. Acquisition fallout. So we're going to dig a little bit into acquisition following the most recent massive beauty news about Rhode being acquired by Elf. I think that was what came to mind for me, and that's why we wanted to include that in this presentation and kind of talk to you about what does that look like when you're seeking to be acquired. Devaluation. So in the acquisition phase, devaluation of the company. There are also substantial ancillary costs. So let's say, for example, you get a warning letter, you might have the cost of the attorney to write the response or the consultants to come in and do audits. But in addition, you're going to have ancillary costs of maybe reprinting your labels, redoing all your SOPs, your trainings. There's so many ancillary costs that can come from these regulatory interventions or enforcement. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And then finally, brand reputation, which everyone, it's the most important thing right now, especially, because consumers are becoming more and more knowledgeable about brands. And, we're going to talk about influencer marketing and all that good stuff. So brand reputation is key, right? All right, so labeling, claims, and ingredients. Each of these slides is going to go through kind of a red flag area, an area that you want to tread carefully, and we want you to understand what some of the risks are here. And again, we couldn't dig into everything. There's so many, right? Carrie and I do this for a living, so we talk about all this stuff on a consistent basis. We couldn't do all of it, but we're trying to just kind of skim the surface on what we think is the most important for beauty brands and quality control people and manufacturers, all of you guys, what you need to know. So first, for labeling, claims, and ingredients is under the FDA. We now have MOCRA. I really hope everyone on this webinar is familiar with MOCRA. It's the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, and this was the largest sweeping change to cosmetic regulation since 1938. So it's a big, big deal. It's slowly rolling out since the law was passed by Congress, and now FDA has the task of creating the regulations, right, to flesh out those rules. So first, I wanted to talk about adulteration. These are, so FDA would consider a product adulterated if it's contaminated in some way. We're just keeping it very basic. You would focus on good manufacturing practices. You would focus on quality control to avoid adulteration. Misbranding focuses on the labeling. So it's focusing on, do you have all of the required pieces on your label, all of the content on there? Is your type sizing correct? There's some new requirements under MOCRA for listing the responsible person on your labeling. So just making sure your labeling is there, and then also that it's truthful and not misleading. You're not making misleading statements. Next, drug claims. So without getting too much into this, because I will geek out to this stuff, claims is probably my favorite thing to do as part of my job. But essentially, there is this line between cosmetics on one side, drugs on the other. So cosmetics, you can claim to beautify, enhance the appearance. It focuses on really like what's skin epidermis deep, like anything that's on the external, we'll say. That's how I talk to clients about this. But anything that goes kind of into the structure or function of the body, anything that talks about prevent, mitigate, treat, or cure a disease or condition, which an example of that in the cosmetic industry is eczema, acne, things like that. Those are considered drug claims, and FDA is definitely on notice. They've issued warning letters for this. So it's really important to keep in mind, not going over that line. I gave the example here, stimulates cell regeneration, reduces inflammation. I can tell you, and I did a webinar last month, if you guys want to check it out, it's on LinkedIn Live, where we talked about this trend that's happening where consumers are essentially trying to get the most bang for their buck. They don't want to just spend money on a cosmetic. They want a cosmetic that's going to perform. It's going to provide multifunction. And because of that, you're more likely, if you're following that trend, you're more likely as a brand to want to use drug-like claims. So you have to tread lightly and be really cautious with using those types of claims. And it's becoming, more and more common for companies to use them because they want to, demonstrate what kind of performance the product can provide. In addition, part of MOCRA, ingredient safety substantiation. So there's not just on the ingredients, so having scientific literature or testing done on the ingredients and their safety, but also on the formula. This is really important, making sure that the formula and how all the ingredients interact is also substantiated for safety. Again, we're doing like really broad strokes on this stuff, guys, but it's important for you to at least have an idea and you can do some more research. Next on the FTC/NAD side, substantiation of claims. And this is more, it's not on the safety side, it's substantiating that the claim that you're making. So what you're saying the product can do, that you actually have data to back that up. And I can tell you one of the things I'm seeing, a trend that I'm seeing, especially on the NAD side, is they are breaking down consumer perception studies, and they're expecting them to be very well conducted, almost to the level of a randomized controlled trial in some cases. I was shocked recently dealing with NAD and seeing what they wanted to see from a consumer perception study. So it's not just making sure your claims from that study are appropriate, to state that it's a consumer perception, right? That 65% of users stated blah, 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 part of this consumer perception study, but also that the study was well conducted. That's really important. Next on the litigation side, again, there's so many of these things, of these topics on the litigation side, one of which is the natural clean claims. It seems like I've been repeating that in particular for years. I still have brands asking questions. Can I say that something is natural? Can I claim that my beauty product is clean? You still need to tread with caution. There are ways to mitigate risk, but I would say tread lightly, tread with caution. This area is still very hot. Like there's still lawsuits being filed consistently on those type of claims. And then unclinically proven as well, just making sure that you're not making claims about the types of substantiation you have, and that it's not overstating the type of substantiation you have. So you can say that it's been tested, clinically tested, but clinically proven is an extremely high standard, very difficult to meet. If you have that anywhere in your marketing, I suggest you go back and review that. And then finally, at the state level, deceptive trade practices. So this kind of goes hand in hand with like the natural claims, where essentially, if a company states that their product is natural and a reasonable consumer would not agree that the product is natural because there is no definition, right? There's no regulatory definition, then that would be considered deceptive, right? A deceptive practice. And so at the state level, these can be brought by AGs. So that's something to keep in mind. And it can almost be like a domino where you can have an FTC issue with the natural claim, a litigation, and a state level. You can have all three happen stemming from the same claim. So you just have to be cautious. And I hate to say it, but keep up to date on the litigation that's going on. Prop 65, if you're selling in California, you need to be aware of that. Essentially, it's certain cancer causing ingredients that, if you do have those in your product, they're not under a safe harbor level, then you need to have this really gaudy warning on your packaging. So that's something to definitely be aware of, because California takes it extremely seriously. And then finally, bans on PFAS, phthalates, formaldehyde, and mercury. These are all at the state level as well. There's many states that are really pushing that. And again, it's to fill the gaps that the FDA or that the federal level is not really filling at the moment, or hasn't been. In administrative law, we talk about the federal being the floor and then the states can set the ceiling. So that's what's happening there. So just keeping up to date, any of the states that you are selling in, making sure that you're aware of what the requirements are. All right, next, working with third parties. All right, so this is something that I advise clients on all the time. This is mainly for brand owners. So companies who, for example, have their brand name on a product, but they use third parties to take over different parts of what would have traditionally been, the manufacturing or the logistics, meaning like the distribution, things like that. So in this case, working with third parties, under the FDA side of things, FDA holds the brand liable for oversight of third party activities. You cannot make the mistake of thinking that because you hired a contract manufacturer that has a great reputation and has all the SOPs and all the things, that when something goes wrong, that you will somehow not be liable. You absolutely will. FDA holds you accountable. There is no pushing off of those responsibilities to third parties. You still have to have oversight. So doing things like auditing those third parties, making sure that if they have certifications, they're keeping them up to date, making sure that you have agreements. We talk about here contract manufacturer agreements, quality agreements that require those third parties to update you if they get a warning letter, to update you if they go on import alert, so that you're aware of what the regulatory situation is, so you don't get hit from the side by something that could have been preventable. Also MOCRA registration, adverse event reporting, making sure that that is clear. So registration is required for manufacturers. Listings can be handled by manufacturers or brand owners, whoever that responsible person is on the label. So making sure that that's outlined clearly with any third parties. Adverse event reporting, who's taking in that adverse event? Who does it need to be sent to at that point? Once it's sent to that person, who's the one who actually has to submit to FDA? Making sure you have all of this lined up and a plan in place, really important when you're working with third parties. Your job is gatekeeper. You're the one that's overseeing, everybody in class and making sure that they are doing everything they should be doing. Because ultimately it's going to be your brand that gets into trouble if not. Next, on the FTC NAD side, really just making sure that you're controlling messaging. If there's any third parties you're working with, we'll say like marketing companies or anybody that is not your actual business, any third parties that are involved in marketing or pushing out any messaging, making sure that you're controlling it. And Carrie's going to get into this on the influencer side and social media side a little more in depth. On the litigation side, some of the things that can stem from not overseeing your third parties are false advertising claims, product liability, personal injury claims. These are all things that can stem from not providing that oversight. And then at the state level, this is just an example. The California Safe Cosmetics Act also talks about the requirements of certain parties to oversee third parties. So it goes all the way from the top to the bottom. That requirement still exists. And so I see a lot of brand owners or companies that want to white label, and they're essentially just trying to push off these responsibilities. You really can't do that. At the end of the day, it's your product, it's your brand. You really need to oversee all of this. All right, and now I am going to turn it over to Carrie, who's going to dig into influencer marketing.
Thanks, Heather. Appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information. I think you've done a great job of helping the viewer understand that there are different levels of regulation, and the Federal Trade Commission is one of the most important ones. One thing to remember for all of you who are in this industry, it's a $60 billion industry in the US. And in order to compete, oftentimes a brand will want to use online, social media, or influencers to sell their products. So the FTC has issued a guidance called Disclosures 101 for social media influencers. And it's about an 8-page document. that can be found on the Federal Trade Commission's website. And I would recommend everyone to take a glance at that. What we have listed here are some specific recommendations for you as the brand owner when you are dealing with an influencer. One of the things that's critical is to make sure that the viewer, the person who is the reasonable person out there, understands that the relationship that exists between you and the influencer. So if you're giving products to the influencer and you're not paying them, or if you're paying them, that needs to be disclosed in your marketing material. In the video, it's not enough to have a little small font disclosure. It really needs to be spoken, or the text needs to be large enough where the viewer understands that there's this relationship. Another area that is regulated more actively, either by the FTC and oftentimes within the NAD purview, is things like before and after pictures. So if you are putting content out on social media, you need to be sure that it is accurate. And if you're going to do anything like a before and after, meet the criteria that have been established. The worst thing would be to put something out there that you cannot substantiate, you don't have any data, because that is going to lead either to regulatory action and oftentimes to litigation from plaintiffs. Then also the whole idea of reviews and testimonials. I think everybody understands that when we are buying products online, we want to see what other people's experience has been. The influencer has some obligations, and we've stated here, whether the influencer received free product, if there was an incentive for someone who is following the influencer, is there any kind of reward or benefit? And the other thing to remember on reviews and testimonials, they need to be accurate and they need to be current, because all of these things that are posted on social media have the potential to obviously increase the value of your brand, but they also have the potential to be pointed out when someone wants to attack your brand. So we can go to the next slide. We know that many brands start up and they sell online, or they sell through Amazon or other third-party platforms. Remember, and Heather's pointed this out earlier, you as the brand owner are responsible for the compliance. And you're going to be liable if there are claims that are made against the online retailer. So don't assume that Amazon or another third-party retailer is going to be monitoring your products and your claims for compliance. One good way to ensure that there is clarity around the relationship is to have contracts in place and to review those contracts and make sure that they include things related to the content that you're going to include, your return and quality policies, what the minimum advertised price is going to be. And oftentimes the brand may say, that is just too much. I just want to put my product out there and I just want to sell it. But just remember that at some point, if you are thinking about selling your company, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, you want to have a clean history so that there are going to be no issues from the purchasers. Additionally, you may look at what your distribution strategy is going to be. Are you going to be selling it through distributors? Are you going to be selling your product direct to consumer? You're going to have a hybrid model, and understanding what the requirements are as far as compliance with those is going to be very critical. And then finally, we go back to the whole idea of protecting the brand. So you may use, for example, if you're on Amazon, the brand registry to combat counterfeits. This might be, gray market products, or someone that is tried to mimic your packaging. And that's going to be important, again, in an acquisition, because what you are selling, obviously, to the acquirer, not just to the customer, but to the company or the industry, the individual or the entity that it's acquiring your business, is trademarks that are protected, intellectual property that's protected, and also, some validation that you are taking all the steps necessary to do that. Next slide. So one of the things that Heather and I have talked about is, yes, there's the regulatory side of creating the primary and secondary packaging, creating the brand. But when you get to a point where you want to sell your business, you want to sell your company, having spent some time or spending some time to ensure that you have compliance with the regulatory agencies is very important. Oftentimes, a buyer is going to ask and conduct due diligence, not just on your financials, but also on the regulatory side of the house. They want to understand that they're buying a brand that is, I'll use the word clean, clear, has performed and met all the requirements. If there's been some kind of question or regulation that is being enforced. And the reason that you want that is, one, you don't want the deal to go south because there's some outstanding regulatory action. And two, the acquirer may decide to reduce what they are paying for the business, which is going to be a loss of money in your pocket. Some of the things that the due diligence is going to focus on, you've got a list there. Obviously, as we've talked about before, the importance of federal MOCRA registrations. If there have been any kind of actions taken against your brand for misleading claims, have there been any lawsuits filed? Ensuring that your labeling is accurate, and if there's been any adverse event reporting, and the ability and having all of that data so that you can present it in due diligence is going to be critical. Some steps to take to prepare for some steps to take to prepare for an acquisition, but these are good steps to take in any case, would be having a periodic compliance audit, looking at your operations, looking at the relationships and the contracts and the obligations that you have with third parties to make sure that those steps are being followed. Obviously, looking at labeling and claims and product registrations, knowing what your contracts with third-party vendors say about your ability to sell the company. Can those contracts be assigned? And are there other requirements with that third-party vendor, whether it's a contract manufacturer or 3PL, if there's something that would be a sticking point in the due diligence or in the sale of the business. And if you have any kind of marketing staff, it would be helpful to train them ahead of time so that if they are employees that continue after the acquisition is made, they can continue to ensure that the marketing is done in compliance with the FTC and the NAD guidelines. So, we wanted to do a couple of case studies here. This is a situation where the influencer that you have a relationship with posts a video and they claim some cure of eczema and works better than prescription creams. So what are the issues that come to mind? One, obviously, this is what I would consider the most serious one. It's an unsubstantiated or non-substantiated drug claim. That is going to be a red flag in front of the FDA and the FTC, and in all likelihood, generate a warning letter. There may also be no disclosure of the relationship between the influencer and you. And then finally, the brand didn't pre-approve the content. So what could happen, as we've discussed, it could generate an FDA warning letter. There could be a challenge from another competitor through the National Advertising Division. The retail partner where these products are being sold, if there are complaints, could pull the product. And then one that we didn't include there is there might be a lawsuit filed based on the fact that these are unsubstantiated claims and the customers purchased those products and they didn't get the results that were stated in the marketing material. So how do you solve for this problem? How do you try and prevent it from happening? The first thing is obviously you have a very robust compliance process, and remember that you as the brand owner are responsible for what is put out there in the marketplace. If you're working with an influencer, instead of just sending in an email or sending them a text and saying, "Hey, will you support the sale of our products and we'll send you, free products," and just say these things, you need to have a well-structured contract that outlines what their responsibilities are as well as your responsibilities. And then having a monitoring process to ensure that the influencer is actually complying with your requirements is definitely going to be critical. It also will be helpful in the event that there's either regulatory action or a lawsuit to demonstrate that you did use appropriate measures to ensure that the influencer followed the terms of the contract. So let's go to the next case study. So this is a situation where you have a contract manufacturer and they, for whatever reason, reformulate the product without notifying you as a brand. And the new formula there includes an ingredient that's banned in California. This could also apply to other states where there are ingredient bans. So obviously it's the manufacturer of a product that is in violation of, if it's going to be sold in that state, the state law, and whatever the consequences are for that. Secondly, there's a breach of contract notification. So this is something that hopefully in the contract that has been signed with the contract manufacturer, approval of formula changes is included. And then finally, there's the potential, as there always is in these cases, of some type of litigation from consumers who've used the product. That puts you in a place where you may have to pull the product off shelves, you may have to do a product recall, or you're just crosswise with the manufacturer and you've got to pursue whatever rights and remedies that you might have against the manufacturer. That maybe can be solved with some communication and back and forth. Oftentimes manufacturers are going to say, look, we spent time, effort, and energy. We've created this product. It cost us X. You're going to have to make up for that. And then we'll figure out about the fact that this is non-conforming product. So how do you prevent this from happening? Instead of just relying on, again, back and forth email conversation and maybe a purchase order, we strongly recommend that a brand use detailed quality agreements with the manufacturers. And in that language, you would have clear and conspicuous agreement about what the manufacturer's obligations are, what your obligations are. In this particular scenario, you would ask for, before this situation happens, formula change notification, discussion, agreement. And then the other thing that can be done in any case with a third-party manufacturer in order to protect your brand is to do regular audits. And the manufacturer should be open to that because they're also working to ensure compliance. Next slide. So we, Heather and I wanted to include this. As many of you know, the Independent Beauty Association is one of the trade associations in the US that is meeting with elected officials and regulators at the state and the federal level. And they have recently created and posted on their website this legislative and regulatory map. And this is a great visual that shows where there is current activity, new legislation that's being introduced that could impact all of the brands operating. And this is something that is easy to reference. I have done a lot of work with IBA and been on the board of directors there. And I can tell you that their commitment is to ensure that the marketplace is safe and open, and that unnecessary regulation around cosmetics products isn't allowed to happen. And so I would suggest that everybody just take a look at this. And if you have questions, feel free to talk with Heather or me or the IBA team.
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, when I saw this, when you directed me to this part of the website, I instantly was like, we need to include a slide. I think that's great. I know there's a lot of quality people that are likely on this webinar, at least from the registrations I saw. So I think that that map is a great option to keep you up to date of what's going on at the state level. I'm just going to answer it. Well, first, I wanted to bring up a couple points from Carrie's slides. I didn't want to interrupt him. I think they were incredible slides and gave some great information. There were a couple of things from the FDA side that I thought would be useful. In terms of the reviews and testimonials that you mentioned, a lot of brands are not aware that testimonials that you include on your website, for example, are considered claims. So if you have someone claiming that in their testimonial that your product can cure my eczema, then FDA will consider that a claim attributable to the brand. This is something a lot of people are not aware of. There's like a famous warning letter. This is not a cosmetic one, but I believe it was to Zarbee's, which is that honey kids cough syrup, where essentially FDA called out like a like that they put on a Facebook comment on their Facebook page. So FDA is reaching further and further. The same with FTC. They're starting to reach further and further on the influencer side. And Carrie and I just talked about this. There's an NAD case that just came out with Huda Beauty, where essentially there was an influencer that even though there was no direct contract between Huda and this influencer, the claims that the influencer made were considered, were attributed to Huda Beauty because they had sent this influencer free product in the past. So that was enough to create a connection. So you can see that they're pushing further and further. So it's even more important. Like the main takeaway is that we're trying to really, hammer down that it's important that you have oversight, right, over claims even made by the third parties that you're involved with. And then the other comment I wanted to make was on the Amazon one, which Carrie and I talked about this too, because I have clients in this situation where, Amazon or online retailers, they have the right to pull your listing at any time for the reasons that they deem necessary. And they are not always very quick to put it back up if they find that you bring things back into compliance. And Amazon has continued to see a rise in warning letters from FDA. They're tightening up on sellers. This is important. If you are selling on Amazon, you need to have your compliance ducks in a row, because when you have a product that's making you, thousands of dollars a week, tens of thousands of dollars a week, and Amazon just pulls that, it's an uphill battle to get it back up. So those are just some things that I wanted to interject in there, because I deal with these issues with clients all the time and have experience there.
Heather,
so thank
can
you,
I just
Carrie.
say, yeah, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
go ahead. Of course.
So just one thought, and that is,
Sure.
Oftentimes a brand is trying to grow its business, and they're dealing with a lot of expenses, and they have limited resources. And I think what the message today and in the conversation or the webinar that you did previously is that if you will spend a little bit of time and money early in your development of products and early in your business life, it will pay off in the long run and avoid the likelihood of either regulatory action or being the target of a lawsuit, or just being the target of, somebody going on social media and saying, you claim that your product solved for this problem and I'm the consumer that it didn't work with. I mean, the power of social media is overwhelming at times. Thanks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. It's you really do have to constantly be aware of all the moving parts. Owning a beauty brand today, there's a lot to keep track of. But we're happy to help on that front. Absolutely. We stay up to date on all this stuff. I only have enough time to get to a couple questions. So the first is, as in Europe, it's interesting to see that the brand is the sole liable party, for the authorities, for FDA or what have you. Afterwards, can the brand itself hold the third party liable for its mistakes, fraud, or negligence? I think, Carrie, you can answer that one.
I'm not aware of.
It depends, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I'm just not aware of those situations. But if you have a contract that clearly states what that third party is obligated to do, if you are the subject of whatever the regulatory action is, you're going to go back and you're going to hopefully have some indemnification language in that contract that would allow you to pursue whatever legal remedies that you have. So that's why having clear, understandable language in contracts, and I would say contracts that have been reviewed by a live attorney and aren't just created by AI out there, would be valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's important there, at least the part that I'm looking at, is even if you can hold that third party liable, at the end of the day, in the meantime, your brand is already going to be suffering, right? You're going to be suffering the reputational damage, the cost, having to deal with all the things we talked about, right? Recalls, warning letters, whatever those things are. So ultimately, even if you can hold them liable, it's still going to damage you in the long run. So it's still in your best interest to think about the oversight issue first. And obviously the contracts help, but once the brand is damaged, like that's kind of all you've got. The next question was, do you need to register under MOCRA if you are just the distributor of a product? So I think I mentioned this before. Under MOCRA, the manufacturer is required to register, and then the product listings are going to be usually managed by the responsible person. So that may be the manufacturer, but usually I advise, if it's a brand owner using a contract manufacturer, that they manage the listings. And with that, you're submitting your ingredients, you're submitting your business information, you're submitting your labels. Definitely have your labels reviewed before you submit, because you are, sending them to the FDA, and it's important that those are reviewed. They will kick it back. I've already had that happen. So it's important that you get that reviewed. And then there's one other question. Does the FDA may proceed requirements applied to cosmetics? My understanding is that it's more applicable to drugs. FDA may proceed requirements. I would need a little more information on that. I'm not exactly sure. That might be more on the drug side of things. But yeah, that's all the time we have for the questions. Our time is up. On the screen, you can find ways to connect. We really, really appreciate everybody joining us. I have some questions about, will this be available after the fact? Yes, just go to the event in LinkedIn and it allows you to play back. If not, you can email info@bustoslawgroup.com and request the recording, and we'll send it to you as well. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Carrie. A pleasure as always presenting on these awesome topics with you. And stay tuned for some more webinars coming up next month. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Bye-bye.